All right. Welcome, everybody, to Redemption from Addiction podcast. Today is March 30th, 2022. I have a very unique, every guest is special, right? But today, I think that this is even more special and unique in the fact that Dr. Eddie Capparucci is joining me today. He is a licensed professional therapist, certified as a clinical sex addiction therapist, specializing in treating problematic sexual behaviors, including pornography. Among his many clients have been professional athletes, including NFL and Major League Baseball players, and even television personalities. Dr. Capparucci is the creator of the unique inner child model for the treatment of problematic sexual behaviors. You can learn more at www.innerchild/sexaddiction.com. He believes that at the heart of most problematic sexual behaviors are unresolved childhood pain points. He's the administrator of the websites menagainstporn.org, sexuallypuremen.com, and he's also written blogs for Covenant Eyes, Kingdom Works, Triple X Church, and marriage.com. In addition to being a prominent sexual and pornography addiction therapist, he has spoken to numerous organizations regarding the harmful impact of pornography and what it has on individuals, relationships, and society in general. He is the host of a monthly webcast entitled Getting to the Other Side. You've authored several books, Eddie, Removing Your Shame Label. Second book was Going Deeper and How the Inner Child Impacts Your Sexual Addiction, has been well received throughout the world. So we're going to get into some of these topics, but I think, Eddie, my first question to you, and welcome to the show. How did you get to where you are in being a therapist for pornography and sexual addictions?
Well, first, Matt, thank you for having me here. It's really a pleasure, and I'm looking forward to our conversation today. Yes, how did I get here? Wow, that's a topic that I could probably spend about 3 or 4 hours on. I was first. Let me go back to my childhood, because I did deal with a sexual addiction when I was growing up. When I was 5 years old, my father died of a heart attack, leaving my mother with 4 children. I was the third in that line, and I had a younger brother who was just an infant. He was he was just about 9 months old, and my 2 sisters were about 6 and 8 years older than I was. When my dad died, though, my mom had a nervous breakdown, and she needed to be institutionalized. So we each got shipped off individually to relatives. And so here I am, 5 years old, and I'm being sent to live with these people who I don't even know who they are. And I wind up being there for about a year, because that's how long it took my mom to get well before we finally come back. And so then when we come back, of course, mom, which is like in the mid-60s, has to go off and work in order to help support 4 kids. So my 2 older sisters would watch me quite a bit. And, being older, they were more interested in listening to or watching American Bandstand, which maybe some of your younger audience members may not remember, but it was a daily dance show. And instead of watching this 6-year-old kid, so it was constantly go to your room, go to your room, go to your room. So I spent a lot of time up until I was almost 10 or 11 years old, isolated by myself in my own head with my own fantasy life, and trying to just not be bored. Fast forward, when I started to get an interest, I stumbled along pornography when I was about 13. And when I was about 15, become interested in girls, and that's when I started to date. But what I found very quickly was having one girlfriend was never enough. I always needed another one. And I got tired of them very quickly. So after just a short period of time, I would be moving on. And that trend continued throughout my adult life. Even when I got married, I was married twice. And both times I thought, okay, this is the woman for me. This is the one that God's given me, and I will be happy with her, and there'll be no more infidelity. And that was not the case. Shortly after, I was back doing the same thing once again. And after my second marriage, exploded because I got caught in an affair. I finally said, I've had enough. I was about 37 at the time. I said, I can't keep doing this. I don't know what's wrong with me. Back then, sexual addiction really was just coming into its infancy.
Mhm.
So what I did was I went to someone, a counselor who specialized in relationships. And I go, this is my life. Look at it. It's a mess. I've hurt so many women over the years. What's wrong with me? And what she diagnosed was I suffered from an attachment disorder. Going way back to those years when my dad died, my mom had the breakdown, I'm sent off. I developed the worldview, you know, not realizing it, that the people who love you will disappoint you. The people who love you will leave you. The people who love you can't be trusted. Now, I don't have those thoughts in my head growing up and even as an adult, but they are there under the surface. So whenever I was in a relationship, because of that fear that this isn't going to last, I would be one step in and one step out. So when I finally got that figured out and such, I met my current wife, Terry, that was 25 years ago. And I'm happy to say I've been faithful the entire time. I shouldn't have to even brag about that, but when you have my history, it is something that's rather unique.
Mhm.
But Terry came from a background with a very strong Christian upbringing. I, on the other hand, was sent to church by myself on Sundays. And why I always believed in Jesus Christ, I was what I call the passive Christian. I would go throw my money in the collection pot and then just walk out and be done, and then go back into the world and live for the next 6 days. And so that happened. That went into my adult world also. I would still be a regular churchgoer, but I knew nothing about Christianity. And my wife began the process of teaching me that. And at the time, we were living in New Jersey, and I was in the corporate America. I was a marketing and advertising executive. I had done extremely well in my career. And I had an opportunity. I was recruited to go down to Georgia to take a job, or at least I thought that's what was happening. See, that wasn't really the case. Although I went down there, the reason for me to be there because God wanted me to sit in a pew and hear someone say for the first time, it's about a relationship with Jesus Christ. I had no idea what this man was talking about. I thought he was out of his mind. After the service, I went up to him and I said, you have just blown me away. I need to talk to you. He goes, oh, great. He goes, let's, schedule a time. I go, how about tomorrow? You come over for dinner. And he's like, oh, all right, I do that. He spent 4 hours with me and my wife and talking about what is the Christian life? What is it supposed to be? And one of the questions that he asked that my wife just cringes about when we talk about this, he said, so tell me about your Bible reading and how much do you spend in the Bible? I go, Bible reading? Because that's not my job. That's your job. You're supposed to read the Bible and tell me what it means.
Right.
Uh, which I later found out was totally erroneous. So to make a long story short, what I did was over the next 2 years, I read the Bible 4 times in its entirety. And I really started to understand what did it truly mean to have a relationship with Jesus Christ. And then with that, all of a sudden I'm like, okay, I'm involved in men's groups and I'm in Bible study and I'm doing a lot of volunteer work and I'm really feeling a major difference in my life. I feel so connected with life in general. I
Mhm.
don't have a void anymore that I always thought I had. I always felt this void. It was gone. But then God comes and he says, hey, you know what? I have something else for you. We're moving away from corporate America. I'm like, no, 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 no. We're not doing that. That wasn't part of the deal, you
Mhm.
know? And so I fought him for about 2 years. And my wife, again, got a lot of pleasure out of watching me try to negotiate with God on how the terms of me doing this. And finally, I surrendered and I went back to school, got another master's degree in counseling, did all the state work, and I opened up a practice. But it was a generalist practice. And I thought, okay, I'll just see everybody and anybody. Well, very shortly after, Matt, guys start coming into my office who are struggling with sex and porn addiction. And I'm like, these guys look like me. So I went back and got my certifications in those areas. And that was about 10 years ago. And, you know, the ministry has been blessed beyond what I could ever imagine. But more importantly, is that what I have been able to see, and my wife joined the ministry about 6 years ago, what we've been able to see is God at work every day, helping to change men and helping to restore marriages.
Mhm. That's pretty cool. So as you were talking about your childhood, I was actually thinking back onto my own, in my first exposure to pornography, for the sake of people. I'll just the first comment I want to make is, number one, pornography. The game has changed so much in the last 20 years. My first exposure to pornography was pre-internet days. It was just in the form of magazines, and from time to time you would stumble across a VHS tape, and that was few and far between. Not that I'm sure it was easily attainable, but the way that you can access pornography today has changed so much. And I think what we're seeing here, and I'm surprised it hasn't happened sooner, but what we're seeing here is a lot of things have really surfaced in the last 2 decades, especially the last 10 years, especially. I've done a little bit of research on the amount of pornography use even in the church, and the statistics are astounding. And just as a general point I'll make, Eddie, is there's some recovery groups that I've been a part of or still a part of, and my past addiction was with prescription pain medication. Pornography, although I've been exposed to it, has never really been a stronghold for me. I could see where it could be for many people. But all that being said, it kind of take me into, when a child at a young age is exposed to that, what are some of the things that triggers into the brain at that point? I mean, because you have an image from that point on, it doesn't go away.
Yeah, and you are correct. It's too accessible. And we're seeing children as young as 8 and 10 who are being exposed to porn. Now, two things will happen for a child who looks at pornography that first time. The first is what all of them is kind of like shock and awe, because they have no idea what they're looking at.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like rather overwhelming. And for a large majority of them, they are turning away from it. They're just going to run away and not really stay there. But however, for some, they will go back because, again, it piqued their interest and they want to see more of what it is. That child who had turned his back on porn at that time most likely will come back to it around ages 13, 14, 15, at some point when peers start putting it out there for them also. But what happens is they come to understand that for a couple things. One, pornography, because it creates a level of stimulation, creates a shot of dopamine to the brain. And dopamine is a pleasure enhancing chemical. Well, if you're looking at pornography on a regular basis and you are adding masturbation with that, what you're doing is you are sending high levels of dopamine to the brain that the brain is not supposed to be exposed to. Over time, it destroys the receptors that hold the dopamine. And therefore, then we develop what's called tolerance. I now need to find something that's more stimulating than what I was looking at before. And so now it starts to escalate. Just looking at a nude woman isn't enough. I have to look at, people having sex. Just looking at people having sex isn't more. I have to move into a new genre. And that's why over time, I hear men talking about, you know what, I've seen things and I look at things that I never would have imagined I'd ever want to look at before. And sometimes they don't really have a strong desire to look at it. It's just the fact that the dopamine rush is creating this energy within them that keep them focused on that particular genre.
Yeah, so it sounds so similar to someone who has a chemical dependency, is that you build up a tolerance, and what one drink or one pill or you name it, when it becomes not enough, then it's two, and then when two is not enough, and then with pornography and in this area is, like you said, what one naked woman does, it slips off into even deeper levels of perversion.
Right.
And you could go to, I'm sure, a porn site and just about find anything you want to, from young and old, and all types of just perversion that is not normal, and
Right.
These relationships are not normal that you see acting out on the screen. But I was listening to a previous interview that you did. I think it was on another podcast, but you talked about how when you have inner child issues, or you've had some trauma in your childhood, and you go through different examples of a child who has been somewhat abandoned, or they have this need for affirmation, I think was the word that you used. So you kind of talk about a few of those aspects of that inner child that has experienced something, that has this desire to fill that void in what they're doing when they look and engage with pornography.
Right. Matt, I think that if we look at any addiction, there are three components that are involved. The first one is unresolved childhood pain points. And that could be trauma. And those traumas could be a major trauma, such as being verbally, sexually, physically abused, or it could be a minor trauma that happened, or it could be neglect. And neglect isn't just, nobody's feeding you or nobody's clothing you. Neglect also can come in the form that no one is helping you to become an emotionally a connected individual. There's just a lot of distance that happens. So with those unresolved child points, the second component is our inability to sit with emotional discomfort. We are not taught, what do I do with this pain? So for example, let's say you're 8 years old and you were out playing and your neighbor took your Nerf gun, he broke it. And you're all upset, and you come home and you're crying. You tell your dad, I can't believe Johnny took my gun and he broke it. And you're all upset. And dad, instead of offering comfort and showing you how to regulate your mood, what did I tell you about lending your toys to somebody else? Yo, what's the matter? Are you stupid or not? You know how much that thing cost me? Well, if you think you're getting another one, you're out of your mind. He goes on and on and on. And then finally he says, you know what, just go to your room. So now you're sitting with this pain of, well, my toy was broken, but now it's like I'm also a disappointment to my father, and this is all my fault. So now, as a kid, I don't have a lot of worldly experiences. I also am more emotionally based in my thinking than I am cognitively based. So therefore, what's the solution to deal with this discomfort? I won't think about it. I won't think about it. So how do you do that? Well, too much television, too much food, too much in my own head, entertaining, go back to me with my childhood, all of that that's there. And then the last component is being emotionally undeveloped, that we do not have the skills to be able to solve and resolve emotional problems. All of those combined, I think, is what leads people to addictive behavior, because they don't know what to do with their pain. And so now to answer your question, the inner child, I believe there's an inner child in all of us. And that inner child is trapped in this time warp. And that is about, that's in a period between maybe the ages of 4 and 14, where we went through a lot of very difficult times that almost every kid goes through. Well, what happens is that child, when an event happens today, a negative event, what he does is he starts to get activated because he correlates the event of today with something from the past.
Right.
And when those two things happen, our anxiety level, which, for example, may be on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe a 3 because of the negative event that just happened, it goes from like a 3 to a 7 or an 8. And then with that anxiety, not knowing how to sit with the pain, what do? We run away to help to soothe ourselves.
Right. Yeah, is just like addiction. It's our attempt with our condition to escape suffering.
Correct.
And dealing with it. So,
and I believe there's a lot of suffering that sits within our inner child. And again, he doesn't know how to deal with it. The only thing that kid wants is one thing: he wants comfort. He wants comfort.
That's right. It's a pacifier, a security blanket. And correct. I was listening to a conversation in that podcast too, Eddie, where you talked about, a backup plan. What's the mindset of somebody? It's like, establishing a backup plan, and the backup plan for someone in a relationship where you're protecting yourself, your backup plan may be pornography, because you can't face the realities of the relationship that you're in. So, in the person's mind that has this, this issue, they establish this backup plan as a way to not only soothe themselves, but to, guard their heart, so to speak.
That's right, because I don't want to have to deal with whatever emotional distress. And again, going back to core emotional trigger, the fact that I don't want to feel right now that I don't measure up, or I'm not good enough for you, or that you're disappointed in me. Because again, it brings my inner child back to time when he can hear that same voice, like from a dad or a mom or peers or siblings, or maybe someone else in authority that had put a negative narrative in his head that he believed. And whether that was put there directly with, you're just stupid, or indirectly when you bring home the report card that have a lot of C's on it, and nobody really says anything, but they just look at it with disgust and put it down, but they don't say a word. So that's indirectly you get that message, but we don't want to deal with those messages. So therefore, yes, we need the backup plan. I need to be able to go and escape from these thoughts that I have about myself that, if I'm not careful, will drive me to a sense of self-loathing.
Mhm. One thing that I'm curious about, and even before I knew about you, Eddie, when I started diving into and trying to research this pornography epidemic that I like to call it, because it is. I mean, it doesn't. Pornography addiction doesn't matter if you're in or out of the church. I think it's just as present in the church as it is in the world. It doesn't matter if you're married or not, which in most cases, it's happening in a lot of marriages. And I think it's destroying marriages and relationships. So one of the things that I found to be quite interesting is that here, especially in the last, 10 years or so, advertisement for men with low testosterone, low sex drive, all these kind of different advertisements that we see on television, I started asking myself, like, were we recognizing this 20, 30 years ago? But it seems like it's just surfaced. And I believe, and I'd like to know your thoughts, but I believe that the reason we're seeing a lot of that is because of the desensitization, if that's even a word.
It is. It is.
You've desensitized yourself to receiving pleasure, without intimacy, and especially with men. But I think the same can be said with women. But you desensitize yourself to the reality of engaging in a relationship with intimacy, with emotional intelligence and all this stuff. And now you're basically trying to therapeutically put in testosterone to absorb and superficially give you what is an erection or arousal or whatever you need to be able to perform in a natural way, so to speak. But I think there's a huge tie to where we're at with low T and erectile dysfunction and all these other things that we say advertisements for, to the rise of and the ease of availability of pornography. What do you think about that?
You are absolutely correct. Now, I can't tell you that all cases of low T are correlated to the use of pornography, okay? Because again, there could be other medical conditions that are involved in all of that. But one thing is for certain, we are now seeing an increase in the number of young men, and I'm talking 18 to 30, who are struggling with erectile dysfunction. And we're seeing numbers that we've never seen before. And the idea is, this was not a very common problem among young men. Why has it become a problem? Because of what you just pointed out. They have become desensitized. Pornography is about physical connection. It is about the act. It is about objectifying other people. That's it. Mm-hmm. There is nothing in there that deals with emotional connection. So now men try to start to date. Women are looking for emotional bonding. They're thinking, hey, the way I bond with you is physically. But what happened is, because they've done with the chronic porn and the chronic masturbation, when it comes to now being with a woman, it's not as exciting. Remember I told you about the naked woman? Just doesn't seem to do it anymore. They need something more. And therefore, then they're looking to, they go to fantasy in their head while they're trying to have sex. It doesn't always work. So now their erection dissipates. And again, the problem is all psychological. It's not a physical problem. but yet they're trying, as you say, all the advertising out there now to begin the whole process of let us, chemically repair you.
Hmm.
My wife found an article last week that said that men are going back to an old procedure to be able to deal with their erectile dysfunction. And what that is, that's a penile implant, where what they do is they just put this plastic tubing inside you that you can then sit there and pump up so that you can get and maintain an erection. I
Hmm.
mean, that's how desperate some of these people are. I've worked with men in their early 20s. They're popping Viagra 2, 3 times a day just to
Wow.
maintain this high. Yes, it is an awful situation. But again, it's all the result of not being able to be satisfied. One other thing, if I could say, is that we're also seeing the trend of pornography move to becoming more violent, becoming more degrading, become more humiliating toward women. And so therefore, again, you got young boys who are looking at this stuff and thinking, oh, this is what girls want.
Hmm.
And you also have girls looking at it and saying, oh, this is what I'm supposed to like. And it's a very bad message. In fact, I heard a story a couple of weeks ago of a young couple. They had just started dating. They had never had sex before, and they decided they were going to be sexual. And in the midst of being sexual, he reaches down and grabs her by the throat and starts choking her.
Wow.
And she's mortified. Now think about it. This is her first sexual encounter. Okay, and it too. And she throws him off and said, "What are you doing? Were you trying to kill me?" And he goes, "No, I'm just, giving you what women want. They like to be choked. They like that." And she goes, "You're out of your mind." But that they're learning about love and they're learning about sex from porn.
Hmm.
And no one else is out there. As you said, nobody's having the conversation, nobody's talking about it. What really shouldn't say nobody. There are people out there talking about it, but there's not enough. And therefore, they have the wrong idea about
Right.
what sex is supposed to be. It's supposed to be a way to enhance emotional intimacy. That was God designed.
Right.
You have relationship based on emotional intimacy, and I give you sex to procreate, but also to enhance that physical intimacy. I mean,
Right.
emotional intimacy. These guys have it wrong. What they do is they base relationships on physical intimacy.
Wow. That's really interesting. And when you say that, especially these young men who are, struggling with erectile dysfunction and all these, you said that it's a pure psychological battle. That so it doesn't mean they're convinced. If I understand what you're saying correctly, they're convinced psychologically that they are not able to perform the way that they should in the absence of this, and they become more prone to that mindset is. And what I guess what I'm getting at is, if it's purely psychological, how does one get out from underneath that and be convinced that their natural ability is still there, or is it?
I'm gonna correct myself. I'm not gonna say purely psychologically. It is mainly psychological, okay?
Okay.
Because again, they need more stimulation than what is being given at the moment. All
Right.
right.
Okay.
But two, there is a physical aspect of it. And the physical aspect is that you spent years, sometimes maybe multiple times a day, watching pornography and masturbating. And that masturbation, what it has done, it has desensitized the nerve endings in your penis. So
Mhm.
therefore, there is a bit of that goes on also, because let's face it, a man's hand does not feel the same way as a woman's vagina.
Right.
And so therefore, and sometimes when you guys are masturbating, I don't mean to be so graphic, but they are really holding on tight. And
Yeah.
they are, what they're doing is they're doing nerve damage to their penis. Now that
Mhm.
can be corrected by abstaining for periods of time, for a long period of time, to allow the penis to, the nerve ending to regenerate in
Mhm.
that. The other aspect from the psychological aspect is for, again, to we refrain, there's no more pornography in our life, but we sit and we start to learn what is sexuality, what is healthy sexuality. And it goes back to what I said before. It's not just an act. It's not just, oh, have the orgasm. Instead, it is about an emotional bond. So we have to teach these young men what is emotional intimacy? What does it look like? And that's where their focal point has to be for quite some time. And so that they get the understanding of, oh, that's what the basis of a relationship is,
Mhm.
emotional connection. So it becomes a lot, it's a lot of it is an educational, venture that we're on. We also try to, again, keep them from abstaining.
Mhm. Well, I mean, that makes sense because, I mean, for me and my addiction with prescription pain medication, having done that and taken it daily for a period of about 5 to 6 years, when I abstained from him, when I stopped, it took several weeks for my brain and the receptors in my brain to get back to operating normally, where I could experience certain levels of pain, um, for and understand what that felt like, and just get my body back to operating at its natural state. And in the same
Mhm.
way, what you're talking about with the penis, and you're doing nerve damage, it is so similar to how this dopamine and things were reacting inside of my own brain. So I'm trying to kind of tie the two together to show how similar they are in the physical and in the psychological, and to help people either avoid going down that road, and to help people who are on that road figure out how to get off and get
Right,
back on the right path.
right.
And it's to know that it's going to take commitment, determination, time. It's not something that you're going to solve in a day, because Eddie, you and I are both believers. And what I've learned so much, especially as I explore deeper into God's word and I read my Bible as much as I can every day. Every day, at some point, I'm going to consume some level of scripture. But the message that I get more often than not, in understanding our human condition and our makeup, living inside of an evil world, that we have to constantly deny our flesh. And some people call it crucifying our flesh, to stop giving into these fleshly desires. As a believer, you routinely want to go through a period of prayer and fasting, but I'm talking about, anything that the flesh wants is sinful in its nature. I mean, it's just, and I may be, going a little bit deeper into the mind of a believer, but just to speak to people who are, you know, early on in their belief, is that, um, you know, when the Bible tells us, when Jesus said to his disciples, "You pick up your cross daily," which means that you crucify your flesh daily and walk with Him. Doesn't mean that life is difficult, or it makes life any easier, but it gives you a different perspective on what's going on in the physical. What's my body doing? Why is it responding in the way that it is? Because there's and our common friend, Stephen, we were having a conversation the other morning, and he made a comment that kind of stuck with me, and I want to catch back up with him this week, hopefully. But he made the statement that arousal for some people is different. And when you talk about some of this violence that's going on in pornography, certain things that start arousing other people, I think what you're describing here, Eddie, is that it's a progressive state, but it seems like there is a tendency for certain individuals based on their past as to what starts to arouse them and give them that thrill and that stimulation that, mind blowing, especially at a young age. Is what would you say about that as far as, what arouses one? Is it directly tied to that person's experience?
Yes, I mean, what you're talking about is our arousal template. And
Uh-huh.
usually the arousal template is developed very early on in our life, where somewhere along the line, we wind up objectifying and sexualizing a body part, a object.
Mm-hmm.
It could be like clothing, things like that. It could be many different things that we do, but that's what happens. They get crossed over, and therefore you wind up, that is the arousal thing. It's also the idea of some of the messages that you receive or some of the traumas that you may have gone through. For example, if you were picked on quite a bit in your life, you may find and believe that you are a very weak individual who believes that, I'm deserving of this abuse that I have. Somewhere along the line, you've taken that thought and it got crossed sexually. And again, that's not in all cases. It's in some cases it gets crossed. And so now you may have a very submissive person. They want to be submissive when it comes to sex. And if with everything and anything else that you could think of, but that arousal template, yes, it's usually created early in life, and it's something that we carry with us moving forward.
Okay.
I do want to go back. If I can go back, I want to talk about what you were saying before. Pick up our cross daily. For me, the idea is what we should be doing. If we should be moving away from being worldly creatures, being worldly being, to being spiritual being. That is where that's the process every day. But what you're talking about, of course, is the pathway of sanctification.
Mm-hmm.
I am trying to become more Christ-like, with my walk. Now, I'm of the belief that we will be light years away from being Christ-like on that day of judgment. I mean, we're not even going to be close. But
Mm-hmm.
the desire of God's heart is that we walk toward that journey, that we walk toward Him. And the problem being is that we allow the world to distract us too much. And it's that lack of discipline that allows us to give in to, as you said, the desires of the flesh, when as opposed to, no, you know what? I'm supposed to be a mature Christian, and a mature Christian sacrifices. But it's really hard to be a mature Christian, Matt, if I'm not a mature individual. And this goes back to that idea that I said earlier about being emotionally undeveloped.
Mm-hmm.
We are not fully developed emotionally if we're dealing with a lot of Eve addiction. So therefore, we don't have, even when it comes to Christianity, we're not mature Christians. And that's why if you look at the numbers, as you pointed out several times today, and you look at pornography use, the numbers match between believers and non-believers.
Mm-hmm.
They're almost identical. Now that, kind of scary, because it's like, wait a second, we're supposed to be set apart. We're supposed to be holy.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, as
A
Christians.
peculiar people.
Yes. So why are we, still, at the same level with those who don't believe? Because we are still worldly individuals. Okay,
Right.
yes, and we are of the flesh and we are broken. We're not going to be perfect, but we need to be making the effort every single day to
Hmm.
train ourselves, like you said, every day I'm going to get into word. I don't care how long it's going to take. I may be in the last minute before I go to bed, but
Hmm.
I'm going to have some sort of scripture in my head that I can reflect upon and do. We need that type of discipline because you know what, in my mind, that's the least I can do
Yeah,
with the sacrifice that God made of sending his son to die for me and my sins.
that's right. And Eddie, you talking about that, um, I look at my life and I never want to portray myself as someone who is, super religious or super righteous because, like it says in the word, there's not one righteous. We're all, like Paul talks about in his epistles, we're all filthy rags
Right,
in
right.
terms
That's what
of,
it is.
and you know, I think some people would look at me or even you in our ministry and what we do. We're trying to help people. We're not trying to be better than anybody. And matter of fact, I'm no better than the next man. Um, but I think I'm humble in the fact that God has created a way for me to have a relationship with Him through what He did and what He poured out for me on the cross. And like you said, it's some people may look at me like, man, he's pastor material or he's a super Christian. Man, I'll tell you what, I feel nominal at best.
Mm.
On my best day, I feel marginal from a standpoint of my sacrifice and what I want to give back to him for everything that he's done for me. Even though my life at times is difficult. I mean, I go
Yeah.
through the same struggles that my neighbor does, who may be an unbeliever.
Mm-hmm.
My but my backup plan, like we were talking about, it's
Mm-hmm.
not a backup plan at all. It is my plan. Um, when I go through struggle, when I go through things that are difficult, it always brings me to my knees. I'm always more engaged in the word. I'm always talking to the Lord more. And you find the Lord in your brokenness. If brokenness wasn't a part of this whole worldly experience, how would we find God? And so when
That's
people
right.
ask me the question, and we can go into apologetics, but where do you find God? You're not going to find him when you're on the mountain. You're
That's
going to
right.
find him in the valley. You're going to find him in your brokenness. So unfortunately, sometimes brokenness is a part of it, whether you're a believer or you're an unbeliever. But when Paul talks about in I believe it's in Ephesians, he talks about the thorn in his side. I he asked God 3 different times would he take that thorn from his side, and God said no, because it makes him humble. I don't know what that thorn was. It may
Mm-hmm.
be pride. It may be some issue that was unique to him, but it wasn't in God's will to remove that, because it kept Paul in a posture and a heart position that he needed to be to do his will.
All right,
And
it brought glory to God with
absolutely.
what he did. I love what you're saying because, and I hope you never lose um that mindset, because for me, if I look at what the real Christian life needs to be, the foundation, of course, has to be faith.
Mm-hmm.
But that next layer, if it's not humility, if it's
Mm-hmm.
not humbleness, let me tell you, the rest of it is a house of cards. And
That's
that's
right.
why for me, I go back to Paul's line of, I want to be the less of the least of God people.
Mm-hmm.
I not great English, but I mean, I just want to be the less, and that's what I think of myself. I am nothing more than a vessel.
Mm-hmm.
I'm a vessel. Here it is, the sinner who's living this, kind of outrageous good life as a corporate executive. And he takes me and he puts me into this ministry, which he is blessed. I mean, I have no complaint whatsoever, but he put me here. And again, there's stuff that comes out of my mouth at times. I don't know where it came from. I don't understand it. It is from the Holy Spirit. It is not
Mhm.
from me. And I think, we need to maintain that humility because again, it talks about a lot in Romans. What does, Paul talks about? He talked about the fact, so you know what, that we do not boast.
Mhm.
We should not boast. I think if there's anything that's more, it makes you want to cringe when you watch a boastful Christian.
Mhm.
I mean, you just want to crawl under a rock and just bury yourself. You don't want to hear it.
Yep.
It's so much. So yeah, I hope if people are listening, even though we can throw some scripture out here and there, it doesn't mean we're any better than
No.
anyone else. We've just
No.
spent a little bit more time studying that we
Mhm.
have and perhaps reflecting on things. But you know what? There are a lot of other men and women out there who've done way more studying and reflecting than we have. But
Yep.
yet, I don't care how much we do, our puny little brains are never going to understand the vast wisdom and knowledge of God's actions or inactions in our life.
Absolutely. Um, I think about often, Eddie, the a world in which we live in that is doing everything that it can to take God out of the conversation. Hollywood, is the world is getting more evil by the day, right?
Mm-hmm.
But for the believer, is when the Bible tells us to, when you see these things going on, like Jesus said in Matthew, I think 24, he said, when you see these things, just keep looking up because your redemption is drawing nigh. People will hate you but remember, they hated me first.
Right. Correct.
Some
Right.
that didn't really sit well with me, and it's uncomfortable and all that. But I'm always reminded that when I see things like that going on in the world, and while it's on my mind, I'm sure you have seen the Oscars slap by Will Smith the other night to Chris Rock.
He had a moment.
He did. But it came to my mind this morning before we started recording. There's some people that think that it was staged, and it very well may be. But what I saw happening there was Will Smith was extreme. He was an extremely wounded individual because 2 years ago, his wife on some kind of public recording basically admitted that she had been unfaithful to him and basically blamed him for her unfaithfulness because of something or another. And this happened, 2 years ago. So that was right there in front of the whole world to see. And when I look at that event that took place at the Oscars, it was as if he was doing that to demonstrate to her that he was trying to basically get back something he felt like it was taken from him. He responded as if he had been completely emasculated and was extremely insecure in his relationship with her. And I don't know all that went on, but what I saw happen and play out there was a wounded and hurt individual doing what he did.
Yeah, absolutely. You're right about that. Again, I don't spend a lot of time focusing on Hollywood.
Yeah.
I didn't watch the Oscars. I did see the clip. But yeah, I mean, again, we all have our own insecurities. And the problem is if we do not address them, they're going to come out. They're going to come out in actions that are most likely either going to be destructive or they're going to be embarrassing. Now, to your point, whether staged or not, well, I got to tell you, man, if that was staged, boy, he's putting himself through a lot of scrutiny and embarrassment for what he did. That leads me to believe that maybe it wasn't. But, again, you're right. There's something more that's going on there, as there is with all of us. But that's why, I go back to my inner child model. The basis for that model is to understand the why question.
Right.
Why does sex have a stronghold on your life? Just like why do pain meds have a stronghold on your life? Why does alcohol? Why does food? Keep going down the line. In fact, I can't tell you how many people have said to me, you got the title of your book wrong. It should have been Going Deeper, How the Inner Child Impacts Your Life or Impact Your Disorders or that in general, not just sex addiction. And they're right, it is, because I think it does go across the board. It is those unresolved childhood pain points that we need to be addressing so that we can be able to stay one step ahead of whatever it is that we are troubled by, so that we don't have that reactive moment that Will had. Instead, we learn to respond, which he could have just sat there. He could have wagged his finger like that. No, not good. Not good.
Yeah.
That's all you got to do. Not good. So.
Yeah, I agree, Eddie. So we're kind of up on time, but I wanted to close out the show by asking you, not really asking you a question, but what I usually do with our guest is I kind of give a picture of a young man who, like you, right now that's listening to this is really struggling with pornography, struggling with sex. He's drifted off into an area of increased perversion, maybe even engaging in child sex, type stuff.
Mhm.
You can go really deep with this topic, and like we've mentioned, this doesn't get talked about enough, and I don't even think it's possible that it will ever be talked about enough, even if everybody starts talking about it. But that being the case, that somebody listening to this is in that type of situation. They've recognized, at least to a minimum, that it is destroying the relationships that they're a part of, whether they're married or what they're doing. They're in complete isolation, like anybody else would be. What is your message to that individual? What's the next step that they need to take in getting some help?
All right. Well, I think the first point I would make is that my heart breaks for you, and I know God's heart breaks for you too. The first thing you need to do, though, is to step out of the dark and move into the light. You need to be able to hold on to the fear that Satan is putting in you, that, you know what, if you go out there and tell people, no one will ever want to be around you again. You have to hold on to that fear, and you have to bring it out, and you need to tell someone. And in telling someone, you're gonna find that there seems like a complete your anxiety is gonna drop a great deal. You're gonna find a sense of comfort in sharing.
Vulnerability is a huge release.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But also then there are so many resources that are out there. Good support groups that are available, excellent counselors who specialize in the coaches who specialize in it. There are other men. This is, Matt said, this is an epidemic. It's going to become a zombie. Okay, it's going to become huge, this thing, when we get done, because there's too much of it. You are not alone. You're not alone. Step out, seek help, and if you do the work, I promise you can be released from the bondage of this disorder.
That's great. Well, Eddie, thank you so much for your time today, and for joining our show. I'm sure that it'll touch a lot of people's hearts, and I'll I'll reach back out to you in the next few days and just get some additional information. But again, thank you so much for taking some time out today to be with us.
Well, thanks for having me again. I really enjoyed our time together. And like you said, I hope somebody, just even if we impact one person's life to get them out of this, that would be great.
That's right. All right, Eddie. Hey, take care, man. We'll see you.
Goodbye.
See you. Bye.